Well, welcome to It's an Inside Job BiteSize Fridays, your weekly dose of resilience, optimism, and well-being to get you ready for the weekend. Now, each week, I'll bring you insightful tips and uplifting stories to help you navigate life's challenges and embrace a more positive mindset. And so with that said, let's slip into the stream. Hey folks, welcome back to another BiteSize Friday. I'm your host, Jason Lim. This week I've brought up Season 1, Episode 8 from the archives. And it's a conversation with New York Times best-selling author of Unlocking the Keto Code, with Dr. Stephen Gundry. And so in this bite-sized episode, Dr. Gundry dives deep into the science of mitochondrial uncoupling, explaining its pivotal role in boosting our energy levels and extending longevity. You'll also hear practical dietary advice on how to incorporate key nutrients in foods to optimize your health and to reduce the risk of chronic diseases. And so on the other side of this introduction, you'll learn valuable insights that can transform your approach to nutrition and wellness.
If you look at overweight people, and sadly in the West, most people are overweight or obese, and the numbers get staggeringly high. 88% of overweight people can't shift from burning sugar to burning fat. And 99.5% of obese people can't make the shift between burning sugar and burning fat.
That number is staggering because that's what you mean by flexibility in our metabolism. It's the ability to cycle through glucose and free fatty acids as an energy source.
Yeah, and we're beginning to realize now that so many of our disease processes, for instance, dementia, even heart disease, even diabetes, prediabetes, are because that our mitochondria no longer can shift between burning glucose and burning fat as a fuel. And I go into the minutia of why that is, and it is pretty interesting, but the end game is that so many people who are fat think that the minute they stop eating carbohydrates, they'll start burning fat. But in fact, it can be weeks to months, as I profile in the book. One of my patients, Miranda, yes, who was eating a perfect ketogenic diet, and yet she was gaining weight, and she had no metabolic flexibility. And she was just apoplectic on why that could possibly be following a ketogenic diet. And yet, I see it all the time in my clinics.
I consider myself a pretty fit guy. I mean, I train quite often, and I, definitely following your recommendations. So I know I have a pretty good healthy diet right from the man himself. But as I understand it, when we eat, our insulin levels go up, and those insulin acts as helps to transport glucose and amino acids, which are broken down from proteins, into our cells. And then,
correct,
if we have a normal metabolism, or as you call it, the flexibility, then the insulin levels drop, and then the free fatty acids come out. But could you explain why certain individuals, because they lack that flexibility in their metabolism, how insulin acts as a preventative measure from burning fat?
Yeah, and I've profiled this in my earlier books, particularly the last one called The Energy Paradox. Most of us literally kind of eat all the time. Americans, the average American eats 16 hours a day. It's hard to believe, but when we get out of bed and we continue to eat one way or another until we go to bed. And as the book points out, that's really dumb. But what happens is that we literally overload our mitochondria's ability to handle all this. It's, I live in the LA area, Los Angeles, and it's anyone who lives in LA, we have rush hour 24 hours a day. Nothing moves in our traffic.
I've seen the highways there.
Yeah, even in the middle of the night on what we call the 405, you could be in a traffic jam and you go, what the heck? So when mitochondria are overwhelmed, they shift production they shift from making energy into making fat. And they do this. Insulin is actually a fat storage hormone. And it actually makes great sense. Back when we were hunter-gatherers, when we, killed an antelope or we found a great big fruit tree, we would, eat our fill until it was gone. And we would store, using insulin, whatever was left over that, we didn't need for energy as fat. Why? Because pretty soon we weren't going to have an antelope to kill, or wasn't going to be a fruit tree. And so we could live on our fat stores. Now, the problem is the higher your insulin level is, the easier it is to actually make fat. That's number one. But so the higher insulin is, the more you store fat. Now, insulin usually rises when you find food. When food disappears, normally insulin would fall. And insulin being elevated actually keeps fat in fat stores, which makes sense, because if you're trying to store fat, why would you try to bring it out? That would be dumb. So elevated insulin levels prevent fat from being released from fat stores. And there's an enzyme that brings fat out of fat stores called hormone-sensitive lipase. And there won't be a test for your listeners, I promise. But hormone-sensitive lipase is sensitive to a hormone called insulin. So when insulin's up, hormone-sensitive lipase can't work. So what's frustrating is we may have a ton of fat, and yet we can't get to it because of our elevated insulin level. And it's kind of like water everywhere and not a drop to drink. And so when you think about it, 88% of overweight people have elevated insulin levels. 99.5% of obese people have elevated insulin levels. And the really sad thing is that 50% of normal weight individuals like you and me do not have actually elevated insulin levels. And it's actually shocking. I want to just stay on that subject for a second.
Sure.
I train third-year family practice residents in my clinic. They rotate through my clinic for a month at a time. They're in the final year before they go out and be GPs.
General practitioners.
Exactly. So not one of these individuals yet, and I've been doing this for a number of years now, have ever heard of measuring a fasting insulin level in their training. And they're just shocked when, I show them the data and show them why it would be really important to know your fasting insulin level. And that's the sad part, at least of training in the United States, and I suspect it's true in other places as well. So elevated insulin levels keep us from being able to shift from burning sugar to burning fat. Now, why that's important is getting back to ketones. Normally, if you stop eating, after about 8 hours of not eating, we essentially run out of sugar to burn as fuel. And then insulin should fall. Free fatty acids should come out of our fat cells, and we should start burning free fatty acids to make ATP. So far, so good.
So this is glucose and also the glycogen stores in
Correct.
cells. So is it 8 hours or is it between 8 to 12 hours? That just depends. It's a flexible
depends.
window. Yeah. Okay.
Normally, most of us with metabolic flexibility, we start to produce ketones, a small amount, after about 8 hours after we're not eating.
Okay.
By 12 hours, we've pretty much started to really rev up ketone production. And that becomes important as we talk about intermittent fasting. So all of our cells can burn free fatty acids as a fuel. In fact, as a heart surgeon, I can tell you that the heart actually prefers free fatty acids as a fuel, loves them. And I developed, along with other people, methods of protecting the heart by giving them infusions of free fatty acids when we operate on the heart, but that's another story. There's only one problem. Free fatty acids can't get into the brain because they're too big and fat, and they can't get past this membrane called the blood-brain barrier. So now here come ketones. So free fatty acids, if we can get them out of fat cells, can go to the liver. The liver takes free fatty acids and converts them into these water-soluble short fatty acids called ketones or ketone bodies.
Yeah, short-chain fatty acids.
Yeah, and the liver can't use these ketone bodies. So liver throws them out into the bloodstream. And it just so happens that these ketones can go to the brain and serve, if you will, as an emergency backup fuel for neurons in the brain until such time we eat again. And so ketones really exist as a temporary holding pattern for the brain. And it's actually very important because if you think about it, if we're not eating and we're running low on glucose, your brain, you're not eating when you're asleep, and your brain should be supplied with ketones as a way to, make it through the night.
Sure.
Most of us can't generate ketones when we stop eating. And so the vast majority of individuals, their brain begins to starve to death every night. And we wonder where this literal epidemic of dementia and Alzheimer's comes from. And it's literally the brain starves every night.
If you want more, why not go back and listen to the original full conversation with my guest? You will find the link in the episode in the show notes. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. And I'll be back next week with my long-form conversational episodes on Monday and the latest BiteSize episode on Friday. And have yourself a relaxing and rejuvenating weekend.